As a roller coaster enthusiast, there's a few things I look for in the perfect coaster. I love me some powerful forces like airtime, my favorite type of which being ejector, but floater's also great. Positives that push you down into your seat just enough to add an extra sense of thrill to the ride. And laterals are typically something I really enjoy on wooden coasters where you're being shoved to the side of the train, allowing the attraction to feel more alive. Following this, there's the elements and the ordering of such. I really appreciate a ride with excellent sequencing, which fully comes down to the type of ride it is. Pacing is another one of the most important qualities, how a ride is able to maintain its speed throughout the layout. Even external things like theming can enhance one's experience on a roller coaster. Every now and then I come across a ride that combines all of these things, and those tend to be some of my all-time favorites. So in this video I want to count down the 15 most diverse roller coasters I've ridden. And stay tuned because soon I'll also be putting out a list of the most versatile coaster models as a sort of sequel to this topic. Now before we get started, I did just want to give an honorable mention to Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm. The reason being is I think it just might be the most diverse wooden roller coaster I've ridden. In general, wooden coasters aren't capable of performing the extreme elements of steel coasters, but they compensate in a unique feel that cannot be replicated. Unfortunately, that's not what I was looking for in this video, meaning no Woody was able to crack the top 15. Still, Ghost Rider stands out because of its excessive lateral forces, floater and ejector airtime, and its two distinct halves that complement each other beautifully. With that being said, onwards to the top 15, and we're going to start things off with Copperhead Strike at Carowinds. This is a double launch coaster built by Mock Rides with a lot of elements that provide their own unique forces. The number one thing Copperhead Strike is known for is actually a sensation we never touched on earlier, but it's hang time. This is where the vehicle traverses an inversion slowly, intentionally to give you that feeling that you're about to fall out of the train. There's 4 great instances of this on this ride. To counter this are various airtime moments, with most being ejector, but the occasional bit of floater airtime as well. And rounding things out are a surprising attention to detail that parent company Cedar Fair usually doesn't dedicate to its coasters. The theming in the pre-show and throughout the queue line is really well done, and it was a great element of surprise on Copperhead Strike. Number 14, Superman El Ultimo Escape at Six Flags Mexico. One of the most versatile hypercoaster layouts out there, is also one of my favorites just because of how unique of a ride experience it is. Superman strays away from the belief that only wooden coasters can excel in laterals because the sustained moments on this ride are excellent. There's an interesting blend of airtime as well, with a lot of sustained flagector airtime, aka strength somewhere between floater and ejector. It's got some decent positive forces as well, though I think the laterals and the airtime really steal the spotlight here and make Superman El Ultimo Escape a very enjoyable roller coaster. Number 13, Goliath at Six Flags Great America. Believe it or not, only a few coasters from Rocky Mountain Construction made my list, and it may surprise many of you that I consider Goliath one of their more diverse projects. The thing is, this is a very short coaster, and in a way that sort of benefits its entry onto this list. It feels like each element it does have complements the last because it does something a little different. As per most RMCs, Goliath does have some great ejector airtime, but something I found interesting that I'd never seen on their other rides were these bank curves that deliver sustained laterals and even little pops of floater going in and out of them. Lastly, the ride contains 2 inversions, and both of these contain a lot of hang time as they dangle you upside down for multiple seconds. Goliath is an underrated ride, and it shows with how diverse of a layout it's got. Number 12, we're going to another Goliath, the one at Six Flags Over Georgia. It might surprise you to see a B&M hypercoaster on this list, but hopefully this explains why Goliath is my favorite of the model. This style of ride is typically known for its sustained floater airtime, which Goliath has a lot of. But it mixes things up by doing something I haven't seen on any other B&M hyper, and that's deliver consistent sustained ejector airtime on the 4 hills at the end. It was a complete and utter surprise the first time I rode it. You'll also find my favorite turnaround section on any coaster by the company, and that's this ridiculous Helix section that has a nice dose of airtime at its peak before funneling down and crushing you with positive G-force. Once again, this is a coaster I find extraordinarily underrated, and I hope more people begin to show it the love it deserves. Number 11, Fly at Phantasialand. Our first coaster overseas is also an extremely unique ride because it's the only coaster on this list with vehicles beneath the track. Most of the time with flying coasters, you'll get a nice graceful ride through the sky and maybe 1 or 2 moments of strong positive forces. But this layout is far more unique, and part of the reason is it doesn't feel as much like there's distinct elements as opposed to a cohesion in the layout. It's the only flying coaster with launches and sustained airtime, plus it's got many sustained positive G moments and some world-class theming as the cherry on top. Vekoma really took the amusement industry by surprise with this attraction, as I would have never expected a flyer to be this diverse. Number 10, Helix at Liseberg. This famous launch coaster in Sweden really has a ton of different elements in its long 4,500 foot layout. I did find some of its forces to be a little weak compared to other rides on this list, but that doesn't really take away from the fact that they are inclusions on this ride, like the launches and positive forces. I appreciate the variety of airtime and inversions the most though. The 2 camelbacks absolutely chuck you out of your seat, and there's a few hills that provide floater airtime too. There's also 7 inversions on Helix, with some being tighter and more compact, while others are floatier and deliver in hang time. Lastly, I love how they incorporate this layout onto the hillside, allowing the coaster to maintain a good speed throughout the layout. It's a really well done design from Mock Rides and a must ride if you're in Scandinavia. Number 9, Tutaudis at Park Asterix. In general, I think the Intamin multi-launch coaster is an incredibly diverse model, which is why you'll see several rides of that genre on this list. But Tutaudis immediately comes to mind as one of the company's finest designs because of how many different and unique sensations it has. There's floater and ejector airtime, several launches, 3 inversions of varying kinds, and the thing that was able to propel Tutaudis to such a high spot is the park's unbelievable theming efforts. It's all these things combined that is why I believe this to be one of the most complete coaster experiences not only in Europe but in the entire world. Just 1 spot higher, we make our way to its sister coaster, Pantheon, at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. It may confuse people that I put this ride higher when it has a fraction of the theming of Tutaudis, and that's being generous. But it's when you put that aside and focus on the layout that is why I think Pantheon is a very underrated coaster. It provides every type of force that Tutaudis has, but from my experience, I think I like the layout a bit more here because it has 0 dud elements and a few extra long sprawling ones to complement the compact maneuvers both rides share. It could really go either way, but in my opinion, when you strip both rides away from their theming, I do believe Pantheon to be the better ride, in part due to its diversity. Number 7, Skyrush at Hershey Park. Another potentially surprising entry is this big yellow coaster that absolutely focuses on powerful, positive G-force. And I think it's because it's known to be so intense why it's easy to look past all the other insane maneuvers on this coaster. The first drop is the most unique I've experienced with its bizarre profiling that results in powerful flagector airtime. Then the first 2 camelbacks as well as the twisted hill and straight bunny hill at the end deliver absurd ejector. But the most underrated feature of Skyrush is its laterals, which is in part as amazing as it is because of its seats and restraints. Because of the extreme forces, but exposure of the upper half of your body, you will flop around left to right, and if you're not bracing for it, it can be a lot to handle. Technically, a few of the coasters lower than Skyrush I feel maybe have a tad more variety, but this ride performs exceptionally well in the 3 types of forces it's got, which is why it deserves such a high ranking in this video. Number 6, Die Schwarzwald at Hansa Park. This fascinating Gerstlauer Infinity coaster is unlike any other ride on Earth. It cannot be understated how unique it is with its surprises indoors, which I won't spoil here, but I will say those moments absolutely contribute to this coaster's diversity. Luckily, we can talk about the bulk of the layout, and that's everything outdoors. It is hands down one of the most intense rides I've experienced, with crushing positive forces, whippy jolts of laterals, and a handful of airtime moments here and there. Hansa Park also went crazy with the theming, which was a great touch that propelled this attraction even higher than it would have been in the top 15. Now cracking the top 5 is Wildcat's Revenge at Hershey Park. You know, this layout always felt strange to me because it sort of feels like they put random element after random element and somehow got away with making it an exceptional ride experience. But even if it wasn't so good, it's still diverse nonetheless. Wildcat's Revenge kind of reminds me of a miniature Zadra at Energylandia, which is another RMC I considered for this list. But I think its elements are maybe a bit more unconventional, from the shaping and profiling to the sequencing and everything in between. Wildcat's Revenge contains the familiar ejector airtime with some neat sideways moments as well, which are absolute guilty pleasures of mine. The 4 inversions are great, with some floatier ones and others like the last 2 rolls being compact and weaving through the structure. It's also one of the few RMCs to perform well in the lateral department, another reason I compare it a little to Zadra. It's just an incredible action-packed ride experience, and I think it's got a truly fascinating layout. Number 4, ArieForce One at Fun Spot Atlanta. By a hair, my highest ranked RMC in this video is ArieForce One, which I believe has a little bit of everything. It's one of the few coasters I look at and think they couldn't have done much to make it better, especially in terms of the layout and its elements. The sequencing is perfect. I love how different the first and second halves are. You've got sustained and quick jolts of airtime, same with the inversions, and overall, it's just a masterpiece of a ride. It might be another entry that funnily enough benefits from being a little shorter, but that's what makes this list so interesting. My top 3 though, I don't think can be topped in terms of its variety, starting with Batman Gotham City Escape at Parque Warner Madrid. One of Intamin's newest coaster designs also turned out to be among their best. It is an absolutely exceptional ride experience, and a lot of that can be credited to its elements, forces, sequencing, and pacing. Really, the 4 most important things I'm looking for in a roller coaster layout. But here's the thing, Batman's also got some incredible theming, so really it's about as perfect as it gets. I don't think it or the next ride really have much in terms of laterals, but speaking of rather unique forces, it does have some of the best hang time I've seen, with the stall being one of the best inversions in the world. Sustained and ejector airtime of course were another contributing factor, as were the 4 inversions, which are stunning complements to one another. This is a virtually perfect coaster that shares a lot in common with number 2, VelociCoaster at Islands of Adventure. Everything I said about Batman can pretty much apply here too, even though their layouts are entirely different. In their own unique ways, they excel in forces, sequencing, pacing, but the reason VelociCoaster takes the slight edge is it might be the best themed thrill coaster on the planet. The experience feels like it begins in the queue line, which you can't say about most coasters. And even in the first half, you're diving in and out of a raptor paddock, which moves the story along further. It's an amazing ride that I cannot recommend enough, and while I think some could argue it deserves number 1, there's one ride that was able to top it for me, and I think a lot of you know what attraction I'm talking about. Number 1 is the Ride to Happiness at Plopsaland Japan. For those of you who are new around here, this is actually my favorite roller coaster in the world, and I credit that heavily with how insane of a layout it has. It's extremely twisty, like most every element does something rather unconventional in that way. I also love the theming and the onboard audio that makes this attraction feel more like a full package experience. But the obvious reason this takes number 1 is because your vehicles have the ability to rotate throughout the layout. Why that's important is because one ride you may take an inversion or an airtime moment forwards, but another you might be backwards, which is a completely different sensation, and better yet, sideways feels extremely bizarre and underrated because oftentimes it'll result in laterals being paired with negatives or hang time. If you're not a believer in the Ride to Happiness, you've got to make a trip and experience it, because I've never done a ride that feels anything remotely like it. But hey, that's just my top 15 list, and I'd be curious what other rides you think I left off maybe deserved a spot. A few that came close were Zadra at Energylandia, as I stated before, as well as Taiga at Lennon Maki, Hagrid's Magical Creatures Motorbike Adventure at Islands of Adventure, Maverick at Cedar Point, Wildfire at Kolmorden, and the list goes on. There's so many amazing coasters out there, and I think those that feature such diverse layouts should be celebrated as among the best designs in amusement history. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave it a like and subscribe to Coaster Dash for more content like this in the future, and also if you'd like to support me directly, check out my new merchandise store, which you'll find a link to down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon. Bye guys.